Welcome to this comprehensive exploration of one of the most profound and mysterious texts in world literature, the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. Over the next few hours, we're going to journey through this ancient Chinese classic, examining its teachings about the Tao, the way, and how living in harmony with it can transform our lives. We'll explore each major theme carefully, look at key passages and their meanings, unpack the philosophical concepts that have influenced billions of people across centuries, and discover why this 2,500-year-old text remains urgently relevant to our modern world. Whether you're encountering the Tao Te Ching for the first time or returning to it with fresh curiosity, this video aims to make Lao Tzu's subtle wisdom accessible and meaningful. So let's begin our journey into the mystery of the Tao. Introduction. Understanding the Tao Te Ching. Before we dive into the text itself, we need to understand what the Tao Te Ching is, who wrote it, and why it matters. The title Tao Te Ching can be translated several ways, but most commonly it means the classic of the way and its virtue, or the book of the way and its power. The word Tao, also spelled Dao, means way or path, but it refers to something much deeper, the fundamental principle underlying all existence, the natural order of the universe, the source from which everything flows. Te is often translated as virtue or power, but not virtue in the moral sense we might think of. Rather, it's the inherent power or integrity that comes from being aligned with the Tao, the natural excellence that emerges when you're in harmony with the way things truly are. Ching simply means classic or book, indicating this is a foundational text worthy of study and contemplation. The text is traditionally attributed to Lao Tzu, whose name means old master or old child, though whether he was a historical person remains uncertain. According to legend, Lao Tzu was an older contemporary of Confucius who served as an archivist in the royal court of the Zhou dynasty. Frustrated with the corruption and chaos of society, he decided to leave civilization behind and travel west into the wilderness. At the border, a gatekeeper recognized him as a wise man and asked him to write down his teachings before departing. In response, Lao Tzu composed the Tao Te Ching, all 81 short chapters, and then rode off on a water buffalo, never to be seen again. This story is almost certainly mythical rather than historical. Modern scholars believe the Tao Te Ching was composed sometime between the 6th and 4th centuries BCE, possibly by multiple authors, and that it may have begun as a collection of sayings and proverbs that were gradually compiled into its current form. Some scholars suggest it was written as a handbook for rulers, offering guidance on how to govern wisely. Others see it as a mystical or spiritual text about personal enlightenment and living in harmony with nature. Most likely it's both. The Tao Te Ching operates on multiple levels simultaneously, offering wisdom for rulers and common people, for political life and spiritual cultivation. The text consists of 81 brief chapters, most just a few lines or paragraphs long. These chapters don't follow a clear, linear argument like a Western philosophical treatise. Instead, they circle around central themes, approaching them from different angles, repeating key concepts with slight variations, building understanding through poetic imagery and paradox rather than through logical proof. This can be disorienting for readers trained in Western philosophy, but it's intentional. The Tao Te Ching is trying to point towards something that can't be captured in logical propositions or definitive statements. The very first lines of the text announce this limitation. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. This sets the tone for everything that follows. The Tao is beyond language, beyond concepts, beyond the dualities and distinctions that structure ordinary thought. Any attempt to define it or describe it inevitably falls short. Yet Lao Tzu proceeds to write an entire book about the Tao, using words and concepts, because even though language cannot capture the Tao fully, it can point toward it, suggest it, evoke it. The Tao Te Ching is a finger pointing at the moon. We must look at what it's pointing toward, not at the finger itself. The major themes that run through the Tao Te Ching include the nature of the Tao itself, the concept of Wu Wei, non-action or effortless action, the character and conduct of the sage, the wise person who embodies Taoist principles, the virtue of moderation and simplicity, guidance for rulers on how to govern wisely, and teachings about war and conflict. We'll explore each of these themes in depth, examining how they're developed across different chapters, and what they teach us about living well. The Tao Te Ching became central to Taoism, one of the three great philosophical and religious traditions of China, alongside Confucianism and Buddhism. While Confucianism emphasized social hierarchy, ritual propriety, and moral cultivation through effort, Taoism emphasized naturalness, spontaneity, and alignment with the fundamental patterns of nature. Where Confucius taught active moral striving and the importance of social roles, Lao Tzu taught effortless action and the importance of returning to simplicity. These two traditions, often seen as complementary rather than contradictory, shaped Chinese culture for millennia. Beyond China, the Tao Te Ching has become one of the most translated and widely read texts in world literature. Its influence extends far beyond religious Taoism to philosophy, literature, psychology, politics, and popular culture. Its teachings about going with the flow, about the power of softness over hardness, about finding strength in yielding, these have resonated with people across cultures and centuries. In the modern West, the Tao Te Ching has influenced everyone from philosophers and poets to business leaders and therapists, offering an alternative to aggressive, striving, control-oriented approaches to life. What makes the Tao Te Ching particularly challenging and rewarding is its use of paradox, poetry, and ambiguity. Lao Tzu doesn't argue or prove, he suggests and evokes. He uses images from nature, water, valleys, uncarved wood, the feminine, to point toward the Tao's characteristics. He makes statements that seem contradictory. The highest good is like water. The sage does nothing, yet nothing is left undone. To yield is to be preserved whole. These paradoxes aren't logical errors. They're attempts to disrupt our ordinary conceptual thinking and open us to a different way of seeing. The style is also notable for its brevity and simplicity. Most chapters are extremely short, a few lines that can be read in less than a minute, yet each chapter contains depths that can be contemplated for a lifetime. The language is plain, drawing on everyday images and experiences, yet it points toward profound metaphysical and spiritual truths. This combination of simplicity and depth is characteristic of Chinese philosophical writing and makes the Tao Te Ching accessible to anyone while remaining inexhaustible for scholars. As we work through this text, we'll take a thematic approach, rather than going through all 81 chapters in numerical order. This is because the chapters themselves don't follow a clear sequential structure. They seem to be arranged somewhat randomly, or perhaps according to a pattern that's no longer obvious to us. By organizing our discussion around major themes, we can see how Lao Tzu develops his ideas across multiple chapters and understand the coherence of his vision. We'll begin with the most fundamental concept, the Tao itself. What is it? How can we understand something that by definition cannot be fully understood? Then we'll explore Wu Wei, the famous concept of non-action that's often misunderstood. We'll examine what Lao Tzu says about the sage, the ideal person who embodies Taoist wisdom. We'll look at his teachings on simplicity and moderation, on governance and politics, and on conflict and war. Throughout, we'll consider both what these teachings meant in their original context and what they might mean for us today. The Tao, the way that cannot be named. The Tao Te Ching opens with perhaps its most famous and most paradoxical statement. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Right from the start, Lao Tzu is telling us that whatever we think the Tao is, we're probably wrong. Or more precisely, any concept or description we form of the Tao will necessarily be inadequate, because the Tao transcends concepts and descriptions. This poses an obvious problem. If the Tao can't be named or described, how can Lao Tzu write a book about it? How can we discuss it or understand it? The answer is that while we can't capture the Tao in language, we can point toward it. We can describe its manifestations and its effects. We can use metaphors and analogies that help us glimpse what it is, even if we can never fully grasp it intellectually. The Tao Te Ching proceeds on this basis, using poetry and paradox to evoke what cannot be stated directly. So what is the Tao? At the most basic level, the Tao is the way, the natural course of things, the pattern or principle that governs the universe. It's the source from which everything emerges and to which everything returns. In chapter 25, Lao Tzu writes, "There was something formless and perfect before the universe was born. It is serene, empty, solitary, unchanging, infinite. eternally present. It is the mother of the universe. For lack of a better name, I call it the Tao. Notice several key characteristics here. The Tao is formless. It has no shape or definition. It's perfect, complete in itself, lacking nothing. It existed before the universe. It's not part of creation, but the source of creation. It's serene and empty, not agitated or filled with content. It's solitary, unique, without peer or comparison. It's unchanging, eternal, not subject to time or transformation, yet it's also the mother of the universe. It gives birth to all things. It's the creative source of everything that exists. These descriptions already contain paradoxes. How can something be both empty and the source of all things? How can something be unchanging yet creative? How can something be solitary yet present in everything? These paradoxes point to the Tao's transcendence of ordinary categories. It's not a thing among things, not a being among beings. It's the ground or condition of possibility for all things and beings, yet it remains distinct from them. In Chapter 1, after stating that the Tao cannot be named, Lao Tzu continues, "The unnameable is the eternally real. Naming is the origin of all particular things." This suggests a cosmology. The Tao in itself is nameless and formless, but when we name things, we create distinctions and particularities. The Tao is the undifferentiated unity from which all differentiated multiplicity emerges. When we say this is a tree and that is a rock, we're creating conceptual boundaries that don't exist in the Tao itself. The Tao is the seamless whole that underlies and includes all these apparent separate things. Lao Tzu goes on, "Free from desire, you realize the mystery. Caught in desire, you see only the manifestations. This is crucial for understanding how to approach the Tao. If you're caught up in desire, in wanting things, pursuing goals, trying to control outcomes, you can only see the surface of reality, the particular things and events. But if you can free yourself from desire, if you can let go of grasping and striving, then you can perceive the mystery, the Tao itself underlying all manifestations. Desire creates attachment to particulars. Desirelessness allows perception of the universal." The chapter concludes, "Yet mystery and manifestations arise from this same source. This source is called darkness. Darkness within darkness, the gateway to all understanding. The mystery, the Tao in itself, and the manifestations, particular things, are not truly separate. They're two aspects of the same reality. The source of both is called darkness, not because it's evil or ignorant, but because it's beyond the light of conceptual understanding. It's darkness within darkness because even trying to think about it as darkness is already too specific. It transcends even that category. Yet this darkness, this unknowability, is the gateway to all understanding, because only by acknowledging the limits of conceptual knowledge can we open to deeper wisdom." Throughout the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu returns repeatedly to certain images to help us understand the Tao. One of the most important is water. In Chapter 8 he writes, "The highest good is like water. Water gives life to the 10,000 things and does not strive. It flows in places men reject, and so is like the Tao." Water is the perfect metaphor for the Tao because of its qualities. It's soft and yielding, yet it's also powerful. It can wear away stone. It flows naturally, seeking the lowest places, yet it's essential for all life. It adapts to whatever container it's in, yet it maintains its essential nature. It benefits all things without effort or struggle, simply by being what it is. This image of water recurs throughout the text. In Chapter 78, "Nothing in the world is as soft and yielding as water, yet for dissolving the hard and inflexible, nothing can surpass it. The soft overcomes the hard. The gentle overcomes the rigid." Everyone knows this is true, but few can put it into practice. This contains a key Taoist insight. Softness is ultimately stronger than hardness, flexibility more powerful than rigidity. A tree branch that bends in the wind survives while a rigid branch breaks. Water gradually shapes stone. Yielding overcomes force. Another important image is the valley or the feminine. In Chapter 6, the Tao is called the Great Mother, empty yet inexhaustible. It gives birth to infinite worlds. It is always present within you. You can use it any way you want. The valley is the low place that receives water from the heights. The feminine is the receptive, nurturing principle that gives birth. The Tao is characterized by receptivity, emptiness, yielding, qualities traditionally associated with the feminine in Chinese culture. This doesn't mean the Tao is literally female, but that these qualities are central to its nature. The image of emptiness or void is crucial. In chapter 11, Lao Tzu offers a series of examples. 30 spokes share the wheel's hub. It is the center hole that makes it useful. Shape clay into a vessel. It is the space within that makes it useful. Cut doors and windows for a room. It is the holes which make it useful. Therefore, benefit comes from what is there, usefulness from what is not there. The point is that emptiness, absence, the space between things, these are not mere nothing, but essential for function. The empty hub of the wheel allows it to turn on an axle. The hollow inside a pot allows it to hold things. The openings in a room allow light and air to enter. Similarly, the Tao's emptiness is not deficiency but potentiality. It's empty of fixed forms so it can give rise to all forms. Chapter 4 develops this theme. The Tao is like a well, used but never used up. It is like the eternal void, filled with infinite possibilities. It is hidden but always present. I don't know who gave birth to it. It is older than God. The Tao is inexhaustible because it's not a limited thing that can be depleted. It's like a well that gives water endlessly, or like a void that contains infinite potential. It's always present, always available, yet hidden in the sense that it's not an object we can point to or grasp. It's even older than God, more fundamental than any deity or creator figure. This last point is important for understanding the metaphysics of the Tao Te Ching. The Tao is not a personal God who creates through will or intention. It's not a being who thinks, plans, or acts. It's more like the impersonal, natural principle or pattern that governs reality. Everything that exists follows the Tao, not because the Tao commands it, but because the Tao is simply the way things are. Gravity doesn't command objects to fall. Falling is just what objects do in a gravitational field. Similarly, the Tao doesn't command rivers to flow downhill or trees to grow toward light. These are just expressions of the Tao's natural patterns. In chapter 51, Lao Tzu writes, "Every being in the universe is an expression of the Tao. It springs into existence, unconscious, perfect, free, takes on a physical body, lets circumstances complete it. That is why every being spontaneously honors the Tao. The Tao gives birth to all beings, nourishes them, maintains them, cares for them, comforts them, protects them, takes them back to itself, creating without possessing, acting without expecting, guiding without interfering. That is why love of the Tao is in the very nature of things." This passage describes the Tao's relationship to particular beings. Everything that exists is an expression or manifestation of the Tao. Things spring into existence spontaneously, not through divine fiat but through the Tao's natural creativity. They take physical form, develop through circumstances, and eventually return to the Tao. Throughout this process, the Tao nourishes and sustains them, but without possessing them, without demanding anything in return, without interfering with their natural development. This is Wu Wei, effortless action. Applied to the cosmic level, the Tao acts without acting, guides without controlling, creates without attachment to what it creates. Chapter 37 makes a similar point about the Tao's non-intervention. The Tao never does anything, yet through it all things are done. If powerful men and women could center themselves in it, the whole world would be transformed by itself, in its natural rhythms. People would be content with their simple, everyday lives, in harmony and free of desire. When there is no desire, all things are at peace. The Tao accomplishes everything without doing anything in the sense of purposeful, effortful action. It doesn't strive or struggle, yet everything happens as it should. If people could align themselves with this principle, centering themselves in the Tao, living according to its natural rhythms. Social and personal transformation would occur spontaneously, without force or coercion. This introduces a key distinction in Taoist thought between natural action, ziran, and artificial action. Natural action flows from the Tao, happening spontaneously and effortlessly. Artificial action involves forcing things, going against the grain, imposing our will on nature. A seed growing into a plant is natural action. It happens by itself if conditions are right. Trying to make a plant grow faster by pulling on its stem is artificial action. It's interference that damages rather than helps. Much of human society, Lao Tzu suggests, consists of artificial action, trying to force outcomes, manipulating circumstances, imposing order from outside rather than allowing natural order to emerge from within. In Chapter 17, Lao Tzu describes different grades of leadership, but his description applies equally to different relationships to the Tao. When the master governs, the people are hardly aware that he exists. Next best is a leader who is loved. Next, one who is feared. The worst is one who is despised. If you don't trust the people, you make them untrustworthy. The master doesn't talk, he acts. When his work is done, the people say, "Amazing, we did it, all by ourselves." The best relationship to the Tao is one where you're hardly aware of it. You simply live in harmony with it naturally. This is how the Tao itself operates. It accomplishes everything while remaining invisible, never announcing itself or demanding recognition. The chapter suggests a progression downward. First, natural alignment with the Tao, where things happen effortlessly. Next, conscious appreciation of the Tao as something to be loved. Then, fear of violating the Tao. Worst, contempt or disregard for the Tao. The highest state is effortless harmony, where action occurs naturally and you feel you're doing it yourself, not being controlled by something external. This is the goal of Taoist practice, to become so aligned with the Tao that there's no difference between your will and the Tao's way, between what you want to do and what naturally happens. Chapter 25 returns to the mystery of the Tao's nature. Man follows the earth follows the universe follows the Tao follows only itself. This presents a hierarchy of following or conforming. Humans should follow or align with the earth, with nature and natural processes. The earth conforms to universal patterns, larger cosmic rhythms and laws. The universe itself follows the Tao, the fundamental principle underlying all existence. And the Tao follows only itself. It's not determined by anything else, not subject to any higher principle. It's self-so, spontaneously itself, the ultimate ground that requires no further ground. Before moving to our next major theme, let's appreciate the challenge Lao Tzu faced and the solution he adopted. He wanted to write about something that transcends language and thought. His solution was to use poetry, paradox, and metaphor, not to define the Tao, which is impossible, but to evoke it, to create in readers an intuition or feeling for what the Tao is. The images of water, emptiness, valleys, the feminine, the mother, these aren't literal descriptions but pointers toward characteristics of the Tao. The paradoxes, empty yet full, soft yet strong, unchanging yet creative, are meant to disrupt our ordinary thinking and open us to a reality that doesn't fit neat categories. Understanding the Tao is not primarily an intellectual exercise. You don't grasp the Tao by reading definitions or memorizing propositions. You grasp it through direct experience, through aligning yourself with natural processes, through letting go of forcing and controlling and allowing things to unfold as they will. The Tao Te Ching can guide this process, but ultimately each person must experience the Tao for themselves. As Lao Tzu might say, the Tao that I can explain to you is not the Tao you need to find. Wu Wei, the art of non-action. One of the most distinctive and often misunderstood concepts in the Tao Te Ching is Wu Wei, usually translated as non-action or effortless action. This idea permeates the entire text and represents perhaps Lao Tzu's most practical teaching about how to live in harmony with the Tao. But what does Wu Wei actually mean? Is it passivity, laziness, doing nothing? Far from it. Wu Wei is about acting in accordance with the natural flow of things, without force, without strain, without imposing your will on situations. It's about effortless effectiveness, spontaneous rightness, doing what needs to be done without making it into a struggle. Let's start with chapter 48, which introduces Wu Wei directly. In the pursuit of learning, every day something is acquired. In the pursuit of Tao, every day something is dropped. Less and less is done until non-action is achieved. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. True mastery can be gained by letting things go their own way. It can't be gained by interfering. This passage contrasts two approaches to life. Ordinary learning is accumulative. You add knowledge, skills, techniques, strategies. But pursuing the Tao is subtractive. You let go of preconceptions, agendas, forced efforts, artificial complications. You do less and less, not out of laziness, but out of increasing alignment with natural processes. Eventually you reach Wu Wei, non-action. And paradoxically, when nothing is forced, everything that needs to happen happens naturally. The key phrase is, when nothing is done, nothing is left undone. This sounds impossible, but it captures the essence of Wu Wei. When you stop forcing and manipulating, when you act from alignment with the Tao rather than from ego and desire, your actions become effortless and perfectly effective. You do what needs to be done without strain, without wasted effort, without the complications that arise from interference. Think of a skilled athlete in the zone. They're not thinking about technique or trying hard. They're simply responding spontaneously to the flow of the game, and everything works perfectly. That's Wu Wei. Chapter 37, which we touched on earlier, makes a similar point. The Tao never does anything, yet through it all things are done. The Tao itself is the ultimate example of Wu Wei. It doesn't strive or struggle or force outcomes, yet everything in the universe happens through it. Rivers flow, plants grow, seasons change, all without the Tao making an effort. This is the model for human action, to be like the Tao, accomplishing everything by forcing nothing. Chapter 3 offers guidance on how to practice Wu Wei in governance. If you overesteem great men, people become powerless. If you overvalue possessions, people begin to steal. The master leads by emptying people's minds and filling their cores, by weakening their ambition and toughening their resolve. He helps people lose everything they know, everything they desire, and creates confusion in those who think that they know. Practice not doing, and everything will fall into place. This seems counterintuitive. Empty people's minds, weaken ambition, create confusion. But Lao Tzu is pointing to how desire and ambition and the illusion of knowledge create problems. When people are obsessed with status, they compete destructively. When they crave possessions, they steal. When they think they know everything, they can't learn. Wu Wei involves letting go of these attachments and pretenses, returning to simplicity and openness. Chapter 43 uses the image of water to illustrate Wu Wei's power. The softest thing in the universe overcomes the hardest thing in the universe, that without substance can enter where there is no room. Hence I know the value of non-action. Teaching without words and work without doing are understood by very few. Water is soft, yielding, without fixed form, yet it can wear through solid rock. How? Not through force, but through persistence and adaptability. Water doesn't smash against obstacles, it flows around them or slowly permeates them. This is Wu Wei, soft, flexible action that ultimately prevails over rigid force. The passage suggests that something without substance, formless, adaptable, can enter where there's no room precisely because it doesn't impose a fixed form. And this teaching, this way of working without forcing, is rarely understood because most people are trained to believe that more effort equals better results. Chapter 63 expands on Wu Wei. Practice non-action. Work without doing, taste the tasteless. Magnify the small, increase the few. Reward bitterness with care. See simplicity in the complicated. Achieve greatness in little things. In the universe, the difficult things are done as if they are easy. In the universe, great acts are made up of small deeds. The sage does not attempt anything very big and thus achieves greatness. This passage is packed with Wu Wei wisdom. Work without doing, means accomplish tasks without making them into struggles. Taste the tasteless suggests finding richness in simplicity rather than always seeking intense experiences. Magnify the small means paying attention to subtle things before they become problems, like a doctor treating illness when it's just beginning, rather than waiting until it's severe. The insight that difficult things are done as if they're easy points to the effortless quality of Wu Wei. When you're aligned with natural processes, even challenging tasks flow smoothly. Great acts are made up of small deeds because sustainable achievement comes from consistent, modest efforts rather than dramatic gestures. The sage doesn't attempt anything very big precisely because grandiose schemes usually involve forcing and imposition. Instead, the sage works through small natural actions that accumulate into great results, like water gradually shaping stone. Chapter 64 offers practical guidance about Wu Wei timing. What is rooted is easy to nourish. What is recent is easy to correct. What is brittle is easy to break. What is small is easy to scatter. Prevent trouble before it arises. Put things in order before they exist. The giant pine tree grows from a tiny sprout. The journey of 1,000 miles starts from beneath your feet. Rush into action and you fail. Try to grasp and you lose. The master never rushes and thus never fails. She doesn't grasp and thus never loses. People usually fail when they are on the verge of success. Give as much care to the end as to the beginning, and there will be no failure. This teaching emphasizes working with things when they're small and manageable, rather than waiting until problems are large and difficult. Prevention is easier than cure. Establishing order early is easier than imposing it later. This is Wu Wei because it's about timing. Acting at the right moment, when intervention is natural and effortless, rather than forcing action at the wrong moment when it requires struggle. The warning against rushing and grasping is crucial. These are failures of Wu Wei. When you rush, you're out of sync with natural timing. When you grasp, you're trying to control rather than allowing. The result is inevitable failure because you're working against the Tao rather than with it. Chapter 29 warns specifically against forcing in governance, but the principle applies broadly. Do you want to improve the world? I don't think it can be done. The world is sacred. It can't be improved. If you tamper with it, you'll ruin it. If you treat it like an object, you'll lose it. This is a stark statement of Wu Wei philosophy. The world already has its own inherent order and sacredness. Attempts to improve it according to your ideas and plans are tampering. They impose artificial order that disrupts natural order. Treating the world as an object to be manipulated means you've already lost touch with its true nature, as a living, sacred whole. Wu Wei means respecting this inherent order, and working with it rather than trying to remake reality according to your preferences. The chapter continues. There is a time for being ahead, a time for being behind, a time for being in motion, a time for being at rest, a time for being vigorous, a time for being exhausted, a time for being safe, a time for being in danger. The master sees things as they are without trying to control them. She lets them go their own way and resides at the center of the circle. This describes the natural rhythms and cycles of life. There's a time for everything, and wisdom lies in recognizing which time it is and acting accordingly, or not acting when that's appropriate. The master doesn't try to control outcomes or force situations. She simply perceives clearly what's happening and responds appropriately, remaining centered regardless of changing circumstances. Chapter 76 makes the connection between Wu Wei and flexibility explicit. Men are born soft and supple. Dead, they are stiff and hard. Plants are born tender and pliant. Dead, they are brittle and dry. Thus, whoever is stiff and inflexible is a disciple of death. Whoever is soft and yielding is a disciple of life. The hard and stiff will be broken. The soft and supple will prevail. This is one of the Tao Te Ching's most memorable images. Life is characterized by softness, flexibility, yielding, like a baby's body or a young plant. Death is characterized by rigidity and hardness, like a corpse or a dead tree. Therefore, if you want to align with life rather than death, be soft and yielding rather than hard and rigid. Wu Wei is the practice of this suppleness in action, bending rather than breaking, adapting rather than resisting, flowing rather than fighting. Chapter 22 contains paradoxes that illuminate Wu Wei. If you want to become whole, let yourself be partial. If you want to become straight, let yourself be crooked. If you want to become full, let yourself be empty. If you want to be reborn, let yourself die. If you want to be given everything, give everything up. These paradoxes describe the way of Wu Wei. You become whole not by forcing wholeness, but by accepting partiality, your limitations, your incompleteness. You become straight not by rigidly maintaining a position, but by bending when necessary, like bamboo that bends in the wind and thus remains unbroken. You become full by emptying yourself, letting go of preconceptions and desires so you're open to what actually is. This is Wu Wei, achieving goals not through direct forcing, but through yielding, emptying, letting go. The chapter concludes, the master, by residing in the Tao, sets an example for all beings. Because he doesn't display himself, people can see his light. Because he has nothing to prove, people can trust his words. Because he doesn't know who he is, people recognize themselves in him. Because he has no goal in mind, everything he does succeeds. This describes the effortless effectiveness of Wu Wei. The master doesn't display or prove or define himself. There's no ego agenda driving action. Therefore, his actions are transparent, trustworthy, universal, and successful. Not succeeding because he's trying to succeed, but succeeding because he's aligned with the Tao and thus with the natural flow of things. Chapter 15 describes the subtle quality of someone practicing Wu Wei. The ancient masters were profound and subtle. Their wisdom was unfathomable. There is no way to describe it. All we can describe is their appearance. They were careful as someone crossing an iced-over stream, alert as a warrior in enemy territory, courteous as a guest, fluid as melting ice, shapeable as a block of wood, receptive as a valley, clear as a glass of water. These images convey the awareness and responsiveness of Wu Wei. The person practicing Wu Wei is not careless or inattentive. They're extremely alert and careful, but their caution is natural, like someone on thin ice, not paranoid or rigid. They're fluid, adaptable, receptive, clear, all qualities that allow spontaneous appropriate response rather than predetermined rigid action. How does one cultivate Wu Wei? The Tao Te Ching suggests several approaches. First, simplicity. Chapter 19 says, throw away holiness and wisdom, and people will be 100 times happier. Throw away morality and justice, and people will do the right thing. Throw away industry and profit, and there won't be any thieves. If these three aren't enough, just stay at the center of the circle and let all things take their course. This shocking advice makes sense in context. Holiness and wisdom here mean artificial, pretentious displays of virtue. Morality and justice mean rigid rules imposed from outside rather than natural virtue from within. Industry and profit mean the aggressive pursuit of wealth that creates inequality and theft. Throw away these artificial complications and return to natural simplicity. That's the foundation of Wu Wei. Second, letting go of desire. Chapter 46 says, there is no greater misfortune than wanting something for oneself. Therefore, he who knows that enough is enough will always have enough. Desire creates the feeling of lack, which drives forced, striving action, the opposite of Wu Wei. When you know that enough is enough, when you're content with what naturally comes, you can act from sufficiency rather than from neediness. Your actions become expressions of fullness rather than attempts to fill a void. Third, humility and lowering yourself. Chapter 61 uses the image of a great state that makes itself low. A great nation is like a great man. When he makes a mistake, he realizes it. Having realized it, he admits it. Having admitted it, he corrects it. He considers those who point out his faults as his most benevolent teachers. And earlier in the chapter, the great state should be like a river valley, the destination toward which all streams flow. It becomes the center of the world by taking the lower position. Wu Wei involves lowering yourself, like water seeking the lowest place, rather than asserting superiority or control. From the low position, you naturally become central, because everything flows toward you, but you're not forcing or demanding this centrality. Fourth, stillness and silence. Chapter 16 advises, empty your mind of all thoughts. Let your heart be at peace. Watch the turmoil of beings, but contemplate their return. Each separate being in the universe returns to the common source. Returning to the source is serenity. If you don't realize the source, you stumble in confusion and sorrow. When you realize where you come from, you naturally become tolerant, disinterested, amused, kind-hearted as a grandmother, dignified as a king. Immersed in the wonder of the Tao, you can deal with whatever life brings you, and when death comes, you are ready. Wu Wei requires inner stillness, emptying the mind of agitated thoughts, letting the heart be at peace. From this stillness, you can perceive the Tao's patterns and align with them naturally. It's important to understand that Wu Wei is not passivity or inaction in the sense of doing nothing. The sage practicing Wu Wei acts, sometimes vigorously and decisively. The difference is in the quality of action. Wu Wei action is spontaneous, timely, appropriate, effortless. It arises from clear perception of the situation rather than from ego-driven agendas. It works with circumstances rather than against them. It accomplishes much while appearing to do little. It's the difference between a martial artist who uses the opponent's force against them, redirecting rather than resisting, versus someone who tries to overcome by pure force. Both are acting, but one is Wu Wei and the other is not. Modern applications of Wu Wei can be found in many areas. In sports, Wu Wei is the zone or flow state where performance becomes effortless. In business, it's working with market forces rather than against them, finding elegant solutions rather than brute force approaches. In relationships, it's allowing others to be themselves rather than trying to change them. In personal development, it's growth that comes from removing obstacles rather than adding achievements. In creative work, it's allowing inspiration to flow rather than forcing production. In each case, Wu Wei doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing what naturally needs to be done without making it into a struggle. The character of the sage. Throughout the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu refers to the master or the sage, the person who has realized the Tao and embodies its principles. This figure serves as the ideal, the model of what human life looks like when fully aligned with the way. Let's examine the characteristics Lao Tzu attributes to the sage, understanding that these represent aspirational qualities rather than a personality description. Chapter 7 begins with a striking paradox. The Tao is infinite, eternal. Why is it eternal? It was never born, thus it can never die. Why is it infinite? It has no desires for itself, thus it is present for all beings. The Master stays behind. That is why she is ahead. She is detached from all things. That is why she is one with them. Because she has let go of herself, she is perfectly fulfilled. The sage, like the Tao, has let go of self-centered desires and agendas. By staying behind, not pushing forward, not seeking prominence, she naturally ends up ahead. By being detached, not clinging to possessions, positions, or outcomes, she's genuinely connected to everything. By letting go of the small self, the ego self with its wants and fears, she realizes her true self, which is perfectly fulfilled. This theme of self-forgetting appears repeatedly. Chapter 13 says, success is as dangerous as failure. Hope is as hollow as fear. What does it mean that success is as dangerous as failure? Whether you go up the ladder or down it, your position is shaky. When you stand with your 2 feet on the ground, you will always keep your balance. What does it mean that hope is as hollow as fear? Hope and fear are both phantoms that arise from thinking of the self. When we don't see the self as self, what do we have to fear? The sage has transcended the ego-driven concern with success and failure, hope and fear. These dualities only matter to someone identified with a separate self that can succeed or fail. When you see through the illusion of the separate self, recognizing your fundamental unity with the Tao, these concerns dissolve. The chapter continues with advice. See the world as yourself. Have faith in the way things are. Love the world as yourself. Then you can care for all things. The sage sees the world as self not because of grandiose ego inflation, but because of ego dissolution. When the boundaries of the separate self dissolve, you discover you're not separate from the world. You are the world experiencing itself. From this recognition comes natural compassion and care for all things, not from moral obligation, but from simple recognition that caring for the world is caring for yourself. Chapter 49 describes the sage's mind. The master has no mind of her own. She works with the mind of the people. She is good to people who are good. She is also good to people who aren't good. This is true goodness. She trusts people who are trustworthy. She also trusts people who aren't trustworthy. This is true trust. The master's mind is like space. People don't understand her. They look to her and wait. She treats them like her own children. The sage has no fixed mind, no predetermined judgments or positions. She responds to people as they are, adapting to circumstances. Her goodness extends even to those who aren't good, and her trust even to the untrustworthy, not from naivety, but from unconditional acceptance of what is. Her mind is spacious, like the sky that holds all weather without being disturbed by it. Chapter 20 explores the sage's difference from ordinary people. Stop thinking and end your problems. What difference between yes and no? What difference between success and failure? Must you value what others value? Avoid what others avoid? How ridiculous. Other people are excited as though they were at a parade. I alone don't care. I alone am expressionless, like an infant before it can smile. Other people have what they need. I alone possess nothing. I am a fool. Oh yes, I am confused. Other people are bright. I alone am dark. Other people are sharp. I alone am dull. Other people have a purpose. I alone don't know. I drift like a wave on the ocean. I blow as aimless as the wind. I am different from ordinary people. I drink from the Great Mother's breasts. This passage captures the sage's alienation from conventional values and behaviors. While others chase success and avoid failure, pursue what's valued and flee what's despised, the sage stands apart, apparently foolish and confused. But this foolishness is really freedom from conventional delusions. The sage doesn't have what others think they need because the sage has recognized that such needs are illusory. The sage appears aimless because the sage isn't driven by purpose and ambition. The sage seems dull and dark because the sage isn't trying to be bright and sharp in conventional terms. Yet the sage is nourished by the Great Mother, the Tao, which is more real than any conventional achievement. Chapter 26 addresses the sage's stability. The heavy is the root of the light. The unmoved is the source of all movement. Thus the master travels all day without leaving home. However splendid the views, she stays serenely in herself. Why should the lord of the country flit about like a fool? If you let yourself be blown to and fro, you lose touch with your root. If you let restlessness move you, you lose touch with who you are. The sage remains rooted in the Tao even while engaging with the world. She travels but never leaves home because home is the Tao, which is always present. She encounters splendid sights but doesn't become attached or distracted because she remains centered in herself. Letting yourself be blown by circumstances or moved by restlessness means losing connection to your root, your true nature. Chapter 27 describes the sage's skill and compassion. A good traveler has no fixed plans and is not intent upon arriving. A good artist lets his intuition lead him wherever it wants. A good scientist has freed himself of concepts and keeps his mind open to what is. Thus the master is available to all people and doesn't reject anyone. He is ready to use all situations and doesn't waste anything. This is called embodying the light. What is a good man but a bad man's teacher? What is a bad man but a good man's job? If you don't understand this, you will get lost, however intelligent you are. This is the great secret. The sage doesn't have rigid plans or goals. Like a good traveler who's present to the journey rather than fixated on the destination, the sage is available to what actually is rather than attached to what should be. The sage doesn't reject people or situations because everything is seen as an opportunity for embodying the Tao. The statement that a good man is a bad man's teacher and a bad man is a good man's job reveals the sage's inclusive compassion. There's no ultimate dualism between good and bad people. The bad person is someone who needs teaching, and teaching them is the good person's work. This doesn't mean tolerating harm, but it means recognizing the fundamental potential for awakening in everyone and not writing anyone off as irredeemable. Chapter 56 describes the sage's paradoxical qualities. Those who know don't talk. Those who talk don't know. Close your mouth, block off your senses, blunt your sharpness, untie your knots, soften your glare, settle your dust. This is the primal identity. Be like the Tao. It can't be approached or withdrawn from, benefited or harmed, honored or brought into disgrace. It gives itself up continually. That is why it endures. The sage doesn't talk excessively, because genuine knowledge is beyond words. It's lived rather than proclaimed. The practice is listed. Closing the mouth, blocking senses, blunting sharpness suggests simplification and quieting of the stimulation-seeking, discriminating mind. This returns you to primal identity, to your fundamental nature, which is one with the Tao. Being like the Tao means being beyond the pairs of opposites, approach and withdrawal, benefit and harm, honor and disgrace. The sage gives herself up continually, not clinging to any fixed identity or position, and thus she endures because there's nothing to be destroyed. What's soft and yielding can't be broken. What's empty can't be filled. What has nothing can lose nothing. Chapter 66 uses the image of the ocean to describe the sage's leadership. All streams flow to the sea because it is lower than they are. Humility gives it its power. If you want to govern the people, you must place yourself below them. If you want to lead the people, you must learn how to follow them. The master is above the people, and no one feels oppressed. She goes ahead of the people, and no one feels manipulated. The whole world is grateful to her, because she competes with no one. No one can compete with her. The sage leads by following, governs by serving, stays above by placing herself below. This is Wu-Wei leadership, power that comes from humility rather than force, influence that comes from responding rather than imposing. Because the sage doesn't compete, doesn't try to dominate or control, there's no opposition or resentment. Chapter 67 presents 3 treasures the sage cherishes. Some say that my teaching is nonsense. Others call it lofty but impractical. But to those who have looked inside themselves, this nonsense makes perfect sense. And to those who put it into practice, this lofty ideal is very down to earth. I have just 3 things to teach: simplicity, patience, compassion. These 3 are your greatest treasures. Simple in actions and in thoughts, you return to the source of being. Patient with both friends and enemies, you accord with the way things are. Compassionate toward yourself, you reconcile all beings in the world. These 3 treasures define the sage's character. Simplicity means stripping away complications, returning to the essential, living without artifice. Patience means accepting the natural timing of things, not forcing outcomes, working with rather than against circumstances. Compassion means extending care to all beings, beginning with yourself. The passage suggests that simplicity returns you to the source, the Tao itself. Patience accords with the way things are, with natural processes and rhythms, and compassion reconciles all beings. It heals the divisions created by ego and brings unity. The chapter continues with a warning. The generals have a saying: rather than make the first move, it is better to wait and see. Rather than advance an inch, it is better to retreat a yard. This is called going forward without advancing, pushing back without using weapons. There is no greater misfortune than underestimating your enemy. Underestimating your enemy means thinking that he is evil. Thus you destroy your 3 treasures and become an enemy yourself. When 2 great forces oppose each other, the victory will go to the one that knows how to yield. Even in conflict, the sage maintains the 3 treasures. Rather than being first to attack, the sage waits. Rather than advancing aggressively, the sage retreats strategically. The sage doesn't underestimate the opponent by seeing them as evil. That would violate compassion and destroy the ability to understand the opponent clearly. Victory comes not from force, but from yielding, from Wu-Wei even in battle. Simplicity, moderation, and the uncarved block. A recurring theme throughout the Tao Te Ching is the virtue of simplicity and the danger of excessive complexity, ambition, and desire. Lao Tzu uses several images to convey this teaching, most notably the image of the uncarved block, Lipu in Chinese, representing the original, natural, uncomplicated state before civilization and culture impose their artificial patterns. Chapter 28 introduces the uncarved block explicitly. Know the male, yet keep to the female. Receive the world in your arms. If you receive the world, the Tao will never leave you, and you will be like a little child. Know the white, yet keep to the black. Be a pattern for the world. If you are a pattern for the world, the Tao will be strong inside you, and you will return to your original nature. Know the personal, yet keep to the impersonal. Accept the world as it is. If you accept the world, the Tao will be luminous inside you, and you will return to your absolute nature. The world is formed from the void, like utensils from a block of wood. The master knows the utensils, yet keeps to the block. Thus she can use all things. This passage is rich with Taoist imagery. Know the male, yet keep to the female, means understand strength and assertion, but remain rooted in receptivity and yielding, the feminine principle associated with the Tao. Know the white, yet keep to the black, suggests understanding clarity and distinction, but remaining grounded in the mysterious darkness that underlies everything. Know the personal, yet keep to the impersonal, means engaging with particular situations while remembering the universal patterns. In each case, the advice is to return to the uncarved block, the original simplicity before differentiation and complication. The metaphor of utensils and the block is crucial. A block of wood has infinite potential. It could become any utensil. Once it's carved into a cup, it can only be a cup. Its potential has been narrowed. Similarly, human beings in their original nature have infinite potential. But as we're shaped by society, education, and ambition, we become specialized, limited, defined. The sage keeps to the block, maintains contact with the undifferentiated potential of original nature, even while functioning in the differentiated world of particular roles and tasks. This doesn't mean refusing to become anything. It means not being trapped in any one identity or form. Chapter 19, which we touched on earlier, makes the case for simplicity more radically. Throw away holiness and wisdom, and people will be 100 times happier. Throw away morality and justice, and people will do the right thing. Throw away industry and profit, and there won't be any thieves. These three are outward forms alone. They are not sufficient in themselves. It is more important to see the simplicity, to realize one's true nature, to cast off selfishness and temper desire. This shocking prescription becomes clearer when we understand that Lao Tzu is criticizing artificial, imposed virtue rather than genuine goodness. When holiness and wisdom become status markers that people compete for, they corrupt society rather than improving it. When morality and justice become rigid external rules, they replace natural ethical sense with fear and calculation. When industry and profit become obsessions, they create inequality and crime. The solution is to return to simplicity, see things as they actually are, without the overlay of cultural constructs and social ambitions. Realize your true nature, which is already connected to the Tao and naturally virtuous when not corrupted by artificial desires. Cast off selfishness not through moral effort but through recognition that the separate self is an illusion. Temper desire not through harsh suppression but through seeing that most desires are manufactured by society and don't reflect genuine needs. Chapter 12 warns about overstimulation. Colors blind the eye, sounds deafen the ear, flavors numb the taste, thoughts weaken the mind, desires wither the heart. The master observes the world but trusts his inner vision. He allows things to come and go. His heart is open as the sky. This passage critiques the pursuit of intense sensory experiences and mental stimulation. Colors, sounds, flavors, when pursued excessively, they actually diminish our capacity to perceive. We become jaded, needing ever more intense stimulation to feel anything. Excessive thinking clutters the mind, making clear perception impossible. Excessive desire exhausts the heart, leaving us perpetually dissatisfied. The sage observes the world, is present to experience, but trusts inner vision rather than being driven by external stimuli. The sage allows experiences to come and go without grasping or rejecting, maintaining an open, spacious heart. Chapter 80 presents Lao Tzu's famous vision of the ideal society, characterized by extreme simplicity. If a country is governed wisely, its inhabitants will be content. They enjoy the labor of their hands and don't waste time inventing labor-saving machines. Since they dearly love their homes, they aren't interested in travel. There may be a few wagons and boats, but these don't go anywhere. There may be an arsenal of weapons, but nobody ever uses them. People enjoy their food, take pleasure in being with their families, spend weekends working in their gardens, delight in the doings of the neighborhood. And even though the next country is so close that people can hear its roosters crowing and its dogs barking, they are content to die of old age without ever having gone to see it. This passage has troubled many readers. Is Lao Tzu advocating primitivism, opposing technology and travel, recommending willful ignorance of the wider world? We need to understand this as an ideal type meant to challenge our assumptions rather than as a literal political program. Lao Tzu is pointing out that much of what we consider progress, labor-saving devices, expanded travel, increased communication, often makes us less rather than more content. We save labor only to fill the time with more work. We travel constantly but never feel at home anywhere. We're connected to the whole world but disconnected from our neighbors. The vision of people content with their immediate surroundings, enjoying simple labor, delighting in family and neighborhood, this challenges our assumption that expansion, development, and ambition are inherently good. What if contentment comes from simplicity rather than complexity? What if satisfaction comes from depth in what's near rather than breadth across what's far? Lao Tzu isn't saying we must return to primitive villages, but he's questioning whether our direction of travel toward more technology, more stimulation, more connection, more ambition is actually making us happier or just more agitated. Chapter 33 distinguishes between different types of knowledge and strength. Knowing others is intelligence, knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength, mastering yourself is true power. If you realize that you have enough, you are truly rich. If you stay in the center and embrace death with your whole heart, you will endure forever. True wisdom isn't knowledge about external things but self-knowledge, understanding your own nature, your connection to the Tao. True power isn't domination of others, but self-mastery, the ability to govern your own desires and actions. True wealth isn't accumulation, but recognition of sufficiency, realizing you have enough. And true endurance isn't avoiding death, but embracing it as part of the natural cycle, dying to the ego self and thus discovering what's eternal. This teaching directly challenges conventional values. Society prizes knowledge about the world, power over others, material wealth, and longevity. Lao Tzu says these are lesser goods or even pseudo-goods that distract from what actually matters. Self-knowledge, self-mastery, contentment, and acceptance of impermanence. The shift from external to internal, from acquisition to sufficiency, from control to acceptance, this is the movement towards simplicity. Chapter 44 poses questions about priorities. Fame or integrity, which is more important? Money or happiness, which is more valuable? Success or failure, which is more destructive? If you look to others for fulfillment, you will never truly be fulfilled. If your happiness depends on money, you will never be happy with yourself. Be content with what you have. Rejoice in the way things are. When you realize there is nothing lacking, the whole world belongs to you. The questions are rhetorical. Clearly, integrity is more important than fame, happiness more valuable than money. Yet people consistently choose fame over integrity, money over happiness, because they've been conditioned by social values rather than guided by inner wisdom. The teaching here is that looking outside yourself for fulfillment guarantees perpetual dissatisfaction. If you need others' approval to feel worthy, you'll never feel worthy enough because approval is always contingent and changeable. If your happiness depends on external circumstances like wealth, you'll always be anxious about losing it or wanting more. The alternative is contentment with what you have and joy in the way things are. This doesn't mean passive acceptance of injustice or refusing to improve your circumstances. It means not making your basic well-being dependent on external conditions. When you realize nothing is lacking, when you recognize your fundamental completeness just as you are, you're free to engage with the world without desperation or grasping. Chapter 46 makes a similar point. When a country is in harmony with the Tao, the factories make trucks and tractors. When a country goes counter to the Tao, warheads are stockpiled outside the cities. There is no greater illusion than fear, no greater wrong than preparing to defend yourself, no greater misfortune than having an enemy. Whoever can see through all fear will always be safe. This passage connects personal and political dimensions. A country in harmony with the Tao uses its resources productively. Trucks and tractors represent peaceful, constructive activity. A country counter to the Tao militarizes. Warheads represent fear-driven, destructive preparation. The claim that there's no greater illusion than fear is striking. Fear seems realistic. There really are dangers in the world. But Lao Tzu is suggesting that fear itself creates much of what we fear. When we prepare to defend ourselves, we signal threat to others, who then prepare to attack us, justifying our initial fear. This arms race dynamic operates at every level, from interpersonal relationships to international politics. The person who can see through fear, recognizing it as largely self-generated and self-fulfilling, can break this cycle and thus be truly safe, not through defensive barriers but through not creating enemies. Chapter 52 offers guidance for returning to simplicity. In the beginning was the Tao. All things issue from it, all things return to it. To find the origin, trace back the manifestations. When you recognize the children and find the mother, you will be free of sorrow. If you close your mind in judgments and traffic in desires, your heart will be troubled. If you keep your mind from judging and aren't led by the senses, your heart will find peace. Seeing into darkness is clarity. Knowing how to yield is strength. Use your own light and return to the source of light. This is called practicing eternity. The advice is to trace things back to their source. Follow particular manifestations back to the Tao that generates them. This is like recognizing individual waves as expressions of the ocean. Once you see the ocean, you're not troubled by the rise and fall of waves. Closing your mind in judgments means getting trapped in fixed opinions about good and bad, right and wrong. Trafficking in desires means being driven by sense-based cravings. Both lead to a troubled heart because they keep you engaged with surface appearances rather than underlying reality. Keeping your mind from judging doesn't mean moral relativism. It means not being trapped in rigid categories. Not being led by the senses doesn't mean asceticism. It means not being enslaved by sensory cravings. From this freedom comes peace. Chapter 9 warns against excess even in seemingly positive qualities. Fill your bowl to the brim and it will spill. Keep sharpening your knife and it will blunt. Chase after money and security and your heart will never unclench. Care about people's approval and you will be their prisoner. Do your work, then step back. The only path to serenity. This teaching counsels moderation in all things. Even useful activities, filling a bowl, sharpening a knife, become counterproductive when taken to excess. Pursuing money and security beyond genuine need creates anxiety rather than peace. Caring about approval makes you dependent on others' judgments. The alternative is to do what needs to be done. Then step back. Wu Wei again. Don't overdo things. Don't cling to outcomes. Don't make projects into obsessions. This is the path to serenity. Chapter 24 criticizes self-promotion and aggression. He who stands on tiptoe doesn't stand firm. He who rushes ahead doesn't go far. He who tries to shine dims his own light. He who defines himself can't know who he really is. He who has power over others can't empower himself. He who clings to his work will create nothing that endures. If you want to accord with the Tao, just do your job, then let go. Standing on tiptoe, rushing ahead, trying to shine, all these efforts to get ahead or stand out are self-defeating. They're unstable, unsustainable, and ultimately dim the natural light that would shine effortlessly. Defining yourself means trapping yourself in a fixed identity rather than remaining open to your true, fluid nature. Having power over others is not the same as genuine empowerment, which comes from within. Clinging to work prevents the natural completion that allows something to endure. You have to let go for things to truly be finished. The consistent message across these chapters is that simplicity, moderation, contentment, and letting go are not forms of weakness or defeatism, but pathways to genuine strength and happiness. The aggressive, ambitious, complex approach that society valorizes actually produces anxiety, dissatisfaction, and instability. The simple, moderate, contented approach that seems weak or passive actually produces peace, fulfillment, and endurance. This is one of the Tao Te Ching's most countercultural teachings, directly challenging the values that drive most human activity: governance and the art of ruling. While the Tao Te Ching can be read as a guide for personal spiritual cultivation, it's also explicitly a handbook for rulers. Many chapters address how to govern wisely, offering advice that applies both to political leadership and to any position of authority or influence. The underlying principle is the same Wu Wei we've already discussed. Government should be minimal, natural, and non-intrusive, allowing people to flourish spontaneously, rather than controlling and manipulating them. Chapter 57 presents the paradoxical Taoist approach to governance. If you want to be a great leader, you must learn to follow the Tao. Stop trying to control. Let go of fixed plans and concepts, and the world will govern itself. The more prohibitions you have, the less virtuous people will be. The more weapons you have, the less secure people will be. The more subsidies you have, the less self-reliant people will be. Therefore, the Master says, I let go of the law, and people become honest. I let go of economics, and people become prosperous. I let go of religion, and people become serene. I let go of all desire for the common good, and the good becomes common as grass. This is radical laissez-faire philosophy. Though not in the modern libertarian sense, Lao Tzu isn't advocating for free market capitalism or minimal government to maximize individual liberty. Rather, he's pointing out that excessive regulation, control, and intervention, even when well-intentioned, often produces the opposite of what's intended. The more laws you create prohibiting behavior, the more creative people become in violating them, and the less they develop internal virtue. The more weapons you stockpile for security, the more insecure everyone feels, because weaponization creates an arms race. The more the government provides subsidies and support, the less people develop self-reliance and initiative. The Master's approach is to let go of law, economics, religion, even the desire for the common good. This doesn't mean anarchic chaos. It means trusting that when people aren't manipulated and controlled, when they're allowed to follow their natural tendencies, good order emerges spontaneously. The good becomes common as grass. It grows everywhere naturally, without needing to be planted or forced. This is Wu Wei governance, creating conditions for natural flourishing, rather than imposing artificial order. Chapter 60 uses a vivid metaphor. Governing a large country is like frying a small fish. You spoil it with too much poking. Center your country in the Tao and evil will have no power. Not that it isn't there, but you'll be able to step out of its way. Give evil nothing to oppose, and it will disappear by itself. The image of frying a small fish perfectly captures Wu Wei governance. If you keep flipping and poking a small fish while frying it, it falls apart. Similarly, if you keep interfering with society through constant new policies and regulations, you damage the social fabric. The wise ruler governs with a light touch, minimal intervention. The statement about evil is intriguing. Evil exists, Lao Tzu acknowledges. But in a country centered in the Tao, evil has no power because there's nothing for it to oppose. Evil thrives on opposition. The more you fight against it directly, the stronger it becomes because you give it energy and definition. But if you step out of its way, if you don't give it anything to push against, it disappears by itself like a shadow when you remove the object blocking light. This is profound psychological and political wisdom. Sometimes the best way to deal with negativity is not to engage it directly, but to remove the conditions that sustain it. Chapter 65 describes the ancient masters' approach to governance. The ancient masters didn't try to educate the people, but kindly taught them to not know. When they think that they know the answers, people are difficult to guide. When they know that they don't know, people can find their own way. If you want to learn how to govern, avoid being clever. The simplest pattern is the clearest. Content with an ordinary life, you can show all people the way back to their own true nature. The critique of education here is subtle. The ancient masters didn't try to fill people's heads with information, concepts, and theories. That kind of knowledge often makes people rigid, arrogant, and difficult to teach. Instead, they taught people not know, to recognize the limits of conceptual knowledge, to be humble about what they understand, to remain open. When people think they know everything, they can't be guided because they're already certain. But when they know they don't know, when they're in a state of genuine inquiry, they can find their own way because they're open to learning. The governor should avoid being clever, avoid complex schemes and sophisticated theories, because these create complications and problems. Simple, clear patterns that follow natural principles are more effective. And the governor should be content with ordinary life, not seeking glory or luxury, because this models for people how to return to their true nature. Chapter 59 emphasizes restraint and accumulation of virtue. For governing a country well, there is nothing better than moderation. The mark of a moderate man is freedom from his own ideas, tolerant like the sky, all-pervading like sunlight, firm like a mountain, supple like a tree in the wind. He has no destination in view and makes use of anything life happens to bring his way. Nothing is impossible for him. Because he has let go, he can care for the people's welfare, as a mother cares for her child. Moderation in governance means not pursuing extreme policies, not swinging from one ideological position to another, maintaining balance and steadiness. Freedom from your own ideas means not being attached to particular theories or plans. The ideal ruler is like the sky, tolerant of all weather without being disturbed, like sunlight, benefiting everyone equally without discrimination, like a mountain, firm and stable, like a tree, flexible and adaptable. With no fixed destination, the ruler can use whatever circumstances arise, responding appropriately rather than rigidly following a predetermined plan. This flexibility and responsiveness makes anything possible. And because the ruler has let go of ego-driven agendas, genuine care for people's welfare can emerge. Natural, nurturing care like a mother for her child. Chapter 66, which we mentioned earlier, is worth examining more fully for its political implications. All streams flow to the sea because it is lower than they are. Humility gives it its power. If you want to govern the people, you must place yourself below them. If you want to lead the people, you must learn how to follow them. The master is above the people, and no one feels oppressed. She goes ahead of the people, and no one feels manipulated. The whole world is grateful to her, because she competes with no one. No one can compete with her. This describes leadership that operates through service and following rather than through domination and commanding. The sea is lower than all streams, so all streams naturally flow to it. It doesn't have to suck them in or control them. Similarly, the ruler who places himself below the people, who serves rather than dominates, naturally becomes central because everyone flows toward genuine service. Leading by following means understanding what people actually need and want, responding to their real situations rather than imposing abstract theories. When governance operates this way, the ruler is above, has authority and position, but people don't feel oppressed because the authority is exercised for their benefit, not against them. The ruler goes ahead, provides direction and vision, but people don't feel manipulated because the direction reflects their own authentic interests. Gratitude rather than resentment is the response, and because the ruler doesn't compete, doesn't try to prove superiority or dominate, there's no competition, no resistance, no conflict. Chapter 72 warns against oppressing people. When they lose their sense of awe, people turn to religion. When they no longer trust themselves, they begin to depend upon authority. Therefore, the master steps back so that people won't be confused. He teaches without a teaching, so that people will have nothing to learn. This suggests that excessive governance creates the problems it tries to solve. When people lose their natural sense of awe, their direct connection to the Tao, they turn to organized religion as a substitute. When they lose trust in themselves, their own judgment and capability, they become dependent on external authority. The wise ruler steps back to prevent this confusion, teaching without teaching in the sense of not imposing doctrines, but allowing people to discover truth themselves. Chapter 74 addresses the death penalty. If you realize that all things change, there is nothing you will try to hold on to. If you aren't afraid of dying, there is nothing you can't achieve. Those who control their country in the name of the Tao don't try to force issues. They avoid condemning people to death. When people aren't afraid of death, how can you frighten them with death? If you must take someone's life, make sure you do it only as a last resort, in keeping with the Tao. To kill another person is to kill yourself. This is a remarkable statement, given the context of ancient Chinese politics, where execution was common. Lao Tzu questions its effectiveness. If people aren't afraid of death, either because they're desperate or because they've transcended fear, then death threats don't deter them. More profoundly, killing another person is killing yourself, because in the Taoist understanding, all beings are interconnected expressions of the Tao. When you harm another, you harm the whole, which includes yourself. Violence breeds violence. Killing creates the conditions for more killing. The ruler who understands this avoids execution except as an absolute last resort, and even then recognizes it as a tragic failure rather than a triumph of justice. Chapter 75 analyzes why people become difficult to govern. When taxes are too high, people go hungry. When the government is too intrusive, people lose their spirit. Act for the people's benefit. Trust them. Leave them alone. This is straightforward political analysis. Excessive taxation impoverishes people, making them desperate. Excessive government intrusion, constant regulation, surveillance, interference, crushes people's spirit and initiative. The solution is simple. Act for people's actual benefit, not for the government's aggrandizement. Trust people to manage their own lives. Leave them alone to flourish naturally. This isn't sophisticated political theory. It's common sense that Lao Tzu feels shouldn't need stating but does because rulers typically do the opposite. Chapter 53 laments corruption and inequality. The great way is easy, yet people prefer the side paths. Be aware when things are out of balance. Stay centered within the Tao. When rich speculators prosper while farmers lose their land. When government officials spend money on weapons instead of cures. When the upper class is extravagant and irresponsible while the poor have nowhere to turn. All this is robbery and chaos. It is not in keeping with the Tao. This is one of the few passages where Lao Tzu explicitly addresses social justice issues. The great way, the Tao, is easy and accessible to all, yet people prefer complicated schemes and shortcuts that promise quick gains. The result is imbalance. Speculators prosper while farmers suffer. Weapons are prioritized over healthcare. The rich indulge while the poor starve. Lao Tzu calls this robbery and chaos. Strong language. It's robbery because wealth concentration involves taking from the many to give to the few. It's chaos because it violates the Tao's natural balance and harmony. A government that allows or encourages such imbalance is not following the Tao. The implication is that just governance requires maintaining balance, not necessarily perfect equality, but preventing the extremes of wealth and poverty that create instability and suffering. The political vision of the Tao Te Ching can be summarized as minimal governance that trusts people to order their own lives, rulers who serve rather than dominate, policies that follow natural patterns rather than imposing artificial schemes, and maintenance of balance that prevents extremes of wealth and power. This vision is neither leftist nor rightist in modern terms. It critiques both excessive state control and unchecked inequality, both rigid moralism and exploitative self-interest. What matters is alignment with the Tao, with natural patterns of harmony and balance. Conflict, war, and the way of peace. One of the most striking aspects of the Tao Te Ching is its treatment of conflict and war. Writing during the Warring States period, a time of constant military conflict and political chaos in China, Lao Tzu offers teachings on warfare that emphasize restraint, defense over offense, and the ultimate futility of violence. His approach to conflict, whether personal or military, flows from the same principles of wu-wei and alignment with the Tao that govern all his teachings. Chapter 30 opens with strong warnings about military action. Whoever relies on the Tao in governing men doesn't try to force issues or defeat enemies by force of arms. For every force there is a counterforce. Violence, even well-intentioned, always rebounds upon oneself. The master does his job and then stops. He understands that the universe is forever out of control, and that trying to dominate events goes against the current of the Tao. Because he believes in himself, he doesn't try to convince others. Because he is content with himself, he doesn't need others' approval. Because he accepts himself, the whole world accepts him. The key insight here is that force creates counterforce. This is a law of nature, like Newton's third law. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. When you use violence, even with good intentions, you create conditions for violence to return to you. The enemy you defeat becomes resentful and seeks revenge. The population you conquer resists and rebels. The aggressive energy you project creates aggressive responses. This is why violence always rebounds upon oneself, not as cosmic punishment but as natural consequence. The master does the job, whatever genuinely needs to be done, and then stops. He doesn't continue out of momentum, pride, or desire for total victory. He recognizes that the universe is forever out of control, in the sense that you can never completely dominate events. There will always be factors beyond your control, unintended consequences, reverses of fortune. Trying to control everything goes against the Tao, against the natural flow. The final lines connect self-acceptance to acceptance by others. When you're genuinely content with yourself, you don't need to force others to accept you. Your very contentment and self-acceptance creates natural acceptance from others. Chapter 31 continues this theme with specific advice about weapons and warfare. Weapons are the tools of violence. All decent men detest them. Weapons are the tools of fear. A decent man will avoid them except in the direst necessity, and if compelled, will use them only with the utmost restraint. Peace is his highest value. If the peace has been shattered, how can he be content? His enemies are not demons, but human beings like himself. He doesn't wish them personal harm, nor does he rejoice in victory. How could he rejoice in victory and delight in the slaughter of men? This passage reflects a remarkably humane attitude toward warfare for its time, or any time. Weapons are tools of violence and fear, and a decent person detests them. If forced to use them, do so with utmost restraint, as little as possible. Peace is the highest value. If war has shattered peace, you cannot be content even in victory. Your enemies are not demons but human beings. This recognition prevents demonization and dehumanization that makes atrocity easier. You don't wish them personal harm even though you may have to fight them. And you certainly don't rejoice in victory or delight in slaughter. The chapter concludes. He enters a battle gravely with sorrow and with great compassion, as if he were attending a funeral. This is the attitude of someone who understands war's tragedy even when compelled to participate in it. You fight if you must, but gravely, sorrowfully, with compassion for all who suffer, including your enemies. The image of attending a funeral captures the appropriate emotional tone, solemnity, grief, recognition of loss. This is far from the triumphalist, glory-seeking attitude that often accompanies warfare. Chapter 69 offers tactical advice that reflects Wu Wei principles. The generals have a saying, rather than make the first move, it is better to wait and see. Rather than advance an inch, it is better to retreat a yard. This is called going forward without advancing, pushing back without using weapons. There is no greater misfortune than underestimating your enemy. Underestimating your enemy means thinking that he is evil. Thus you destroy your three treasures and become an enemy yourself. When two great forces oppose each other, the victory will go to the one that knows how to yield. The military strategy here is defensive and responsive rather than offensive and aggressive. Wait rather than initiating. Retreat rather than advancing. This seems like advice for losing, but it's actually deeply practical. The side that moves first often commits itself to a course of action based on incomplete information. The side that waits can respond to what actually happens rather than what it anticipated. Retreating creates space and avoids being drawn into unfavorable engagements. Pushing back without using weapons means creating distance through strategic withdrawal rather than through fighting. The warning about underestimating your enemy is crucial. If you think your enemy is evil, purely bad, inhuman, irrational, you misunderstand them. This destroys your three treasures: simplicity, you complicate the situation with projections; patience, you rush to attack without understanding; and compassion, you dehumanize the opponent. When you become enemy to yourself in this way, losing your virtue through hatred, you've already lost regardless of battlefield outcome. Victory goes to the one who knows how to yield, because yielding allows you to adapt, to use the opponent's force against them, to avoid being broken by rigid resistance. Chapter 68 praises the warrior who doesn't glorify combat. The best athlete wants his opponent at his best. The best general enters the mind of his enemy. The best businessman serves the communal good. The best leader follows the will of the people. All of them embody the virtue of non-competition. Not that they don't love to compete, but they do it in the spirit of play. In this they are like children and in harmony with the Tao. The best warrior, like the best athlete, wants a worthy opponent at full strength because that makes victory meaningful and pushes both sides to excellence. The best general enters the opponent's mind, understands how they think, what motivates them, what they fear and desire. This isn't manipulation, but deep understanding that allows effective response. These exemplary figures embody non-competition in the sense that they're not driven by ego need to dominate and humiliate others. They compete, they engage fully in their activities, but in the spirit of play, like children. There's intensity and commitment, but not deadly seriousness, not the grim determination to crush opponents. This lightness, this playfulness, keeps them in harmony with the Tao, even in competitive situations. Chapter 73 addresses courage and risk-taking. The Tao is always at ease. It overcomes without competing, answers without speaking a word, arrives without being summoned, accomplishes without a plan. Its net covers the whole universe, and though its meshes are wide, it doesn't let a thing slip through. This describes the Tao's effortless effectiveness. It accomplishes everything without competing, without speaking, without planning. The image of the net with wide meshes that doesn't let anything slip through suggests that the Tao's way is spacious and allowing, not tight and controlling, yet nothing escapes its reach. This is the model for dealing with conflict. Be spacious and allowing, yet miss nothing. Accomplish goals without aggressive competition. The chapter continues with practical advice. Knowing ignorance is strength. Ignoring knowledge is sickness. If you realize that you have an illness, you are no longer ill. The master is her own physician. She has healed herself of all knowing. Thus she is truly whole. In conflict situations, knowing your ignorance, recognizing what you don't know, the limits of your understanding, is strength because it keeps you humble and attentive. Ignoring knowledge, pretending you know when you don't, is sickness because it makes you blind to reality. The master heals herself of all knowing, the pretense of total knowledge, and thus becomes truly whole. Chapter 76, which we examined earlier, applies directly to conflict. Men are born soft and supple. Dead, they are stiff and hard. Plants are born tender and pliant. Dead, they are brittle and dry. Thus, whoever is stiff and inflexible is a disciple of death. Whoever is soft and yielding is a disciple of life. The hard and stiff will be broken. The soft and supple will prevail. In conflict, rigidity leads to breaking. If you maintain a fixed position, refuse to adapt, insist on your way absolutely, you'll be broken by circumstances or opponents. But if you remain soft and supple, yielding when necessary, adapting to circumstances, you'll prevail because you can't be broken. There's nothing rigid to break. Chapter 78 uses water as the ultimate example. Nothing in the world is as soft and yielding as water, yet for dissolving the hard and inflexible, nothing can surpass it. The soft overcomes the hard. The gentle overcomes the rigid. Everyone knows this is true, but few can put it into practice. Therefore the master remains serene in the midst of sorrow. Evil cannot enter his heart. Because he has given up helping, he is people's greatest help. True words seem paradoxical. Water defeats stone not through hardness but through softness, persistent, patient, gentle action that gradually wears away resistance. Everyone knows this intellectually, but few can practice it because it requires patience and faith. It's hard to believe that yielding can defeat force, that softness can overcome hardness. Yet this is the Tao's way. The master remains serene even in sorrow, because he's not resisting what is. Evil cannot enter his heart, not because he's built defenses, but because there's nothing for evil to attach to, no hatred to feed on, no fear to exploit, no desire to corrupt, because he's given up helping in the conventional sense, trying to fix everything, control outcomes, impose solutions. He becomes people's greatest help by creating space for natural resolution. True words seem paradoxical because the truth of the Tao contradicts conventional wisdom. Chapter 79 addresses conflict resolution. Failure is an opportunity. If you blame someone else, there is no end to the blame. Therefore, the master fulfills her own obligations and corrects her own mistakes. She does what she needs to do and demands nothing of others. When conflict arises, conventional response is to blame others. But blame creates endless cycles of recrimination. You blame me, I blame you. We both find reasons why the other is at fault. The Taoist response is to focus on your own obligations and mistakes. Do what you need to do without demanding that others change first. This breaks the cycle because it doesn't add fuel to conflict. The chapter continues, when you are content to be simply yourself and don't compare or compete, everybody will respect you. In conflict situations, much of the problem comes from comparison and competition. Proving you're right and the other is wrong. Showing you're better or stronger or smarter. When you let go of this need, when you're content to be simply yourself without proving anything, respect naturally follows. Not because you forced it, but because authenticity without arrogance is naturally respected. Chapter 50 reflects on life, death, and danger. The master gives himself up to whatever the moment brings. He knows that he is going to die, and he has nothing left to hold on to. No illusions in his mind, no resistances in his body. He doesn't think about his actions. They flow from the core of his being. He holds nothing back from life, therefore he is ready for death, as a man is ready for sleep after a good day's work. This describes someone who has transcended fear of death through complete acceptance of mortality. When you have nothing to hold on to, no illusions or resistances, you can't be threatened. Actions flow naturally from your core being, rather than from calculation about safety and advantage. This attitude is crucial for dealing with conflict and danger. If you're terrified of death, you're easily manipulated by threats. If you're desperate to preserve yourself, you become rigid and defensive. But if you've accepted mortality, if you're ready for death like someone ready for sleep after good work, then you're free to act appropriately without being controlled by fear. This doesn't mean being reckless. The master is still careful, but the care comes from wisdom rather than fear, from respect for life rather than terror of death. The Tao Te Ching's teachings on conflict can be summarized as: avoid conflict when possible, engage defensively when necessary, use minimum force, maintain respect for opponents, stay flexible and adaptive, don't delight in victory, act from centered calm rather than agitated aggression, and recognize that soft persistence defeats hard force. These principles apply to personal conflicts, business competition, and military warfare. They represent a radically different approach from the win at all costs, dominate or be dominated attitude that often governs conflict. The dance of opposites. A fundamental principle running throughout the Tao Te Ching is the interdependence and mutual arising of opposites. Lao Tzu repeatedly points out that what we consider opposites, good and bad, strong and weak, full and empty, are actually complementary aspects of a unified whole. Understanding this principle is essential for grasping the Taoist worldview. Chapter 2 introduces this theme. Under heaven, all can see beauty as beauty only because there is ugliness. All can know good as good only because there is evil. Therefore, having and not having arise together. Difficult and easy complement each other. Long and short contrast each other. High and low rest upon each other. Voice and sound harmonize each other. Front and back follow one another. This is profound philosophical insight expressed with elegant simplicity. Beauty only exists as a concept in contrast to ugliness. Without ugliness, everything would be equally beautiful, which means nothing would be beautiful. The concept would be meaningless. Similarly for good and evil, having and not having, and all other opposites. The point isn't relativism, that beauty and ugliness, good and evil are merely subjective or arbitrary. Rather, it's that opposites are mutually defining and mutually arising. They're aspects of a unity that we've conceptually divided. When we reify these divisions, treating them as absolutely separate realities rather than as conceptual distinctions, we create problems. We chase beauty and flee ugliness, pursue good and avoid evil, seek having and fear not having. This creates endless striving and dissatisfaction because we're trying to have one side of a duality without the other, which is impossible. The chapter continues. Therefore the master acts without doing anything and teaches without saying anything. Things arise and she lets them come. Things disappear and she lets them go. She has but doesn't possess, acts but doesn't expect. When her work is done, she forgets it. That is why it lasts forever. The master, understanding the mutual arising of opposites, doesn't get caught in striving for one side against the other. She acts, yang, but without forced doing, yin. She teaches yang, but without verbose saying, yin. She has yang, but doesn't possessively cling, yin. She acts yang, but without expectation of reward, yin. In each case, she holds both sides of the duality in balance, rather than trying to maximize one and eliminate the other. Chapter 58 explores how opposites transform into each other. If a country is governed with tolerance, the people are comfortable and honest. If a country is governed with repression, the people are depressed and crafty. When the will to power is in charge, the higher the ideals, the lower the results. Try to make people happy and you lay the groundwork for misery. Try to make people moral and you lay the groundwork for vice. Thus, the master is content to serve as an example and not to impose her will. She is pointed but doesn't pierce, straightforward but supple, radiant but easy on the eyes. This passage shows how pursuing one extreme produces its opposite. Govern with repression intending to create order, and you create craftiness and resistance. Try to make people happy through external means, and you create conditions for misery, because people become dependent on those means and dissatisfied without them. Try to force morality, and you create vice because people rebel against imposed rules or become hypocritical about following them. The master avoids these traps by balancing opposites, pointed but not piercing, straightforward but supple, radiant but easy on the eyes. In each case, she has the yang quality but tempered with its yin complement. Chapter 40 states the principle succinctly. Return is the movement of the Tao. Yielding is the way of the Tao. All things are born of being. Being is born of non-being. The Tao's characteristic movement is return, cycling back, reversal, transformation of one extreme into the other. Day returns to night, summer returns to winter, expansion returns to contraction. Yielding, the yin quality, is the Tao's way, even though yang qualities also arise from it. And the ultimate paradox, being arises from non-being, something from nothing. This isn't temporal creation, but eternal relationship. Being and non-being, something and nothing, are complementary aspects of the Tao. Chapter 36 describes how extremes reverse. If you want to shrink something, you must first allow it to expand. If you want to get rid of something, you must first allow it to flourish. If you want to take something, you must first allow it to be given. This is called the subtle perception of the way things are. The soft overcomes the hard. The slow overcomes the fast. Let your workings remain a mystery. Just show people the results. This seems like devious advice. Allow something to expand so you can shrink it. Let it flourish so you can get rid of it. But Lao Tzu is describing a natural process, not recommending manipulation. Things that expand to extremes naturally contract. Things that flourish excessively naturally decline. If you want to change something, don't oppose it at the peak of its power. Allow it to follow its natural course to exhaustion, then change comes easily. This principle applies to personal and political life. If you're dealing with an angry person, don't oppose the anger directly. That intensifies it. Allow them to express it fully within safe limits, and the anger naturally exhausts itself. If you're dealing with a political movement or social trend that you consider destructive, sometimes the wisest course is to let it run its course until its inherent problems become apparent, rather than martyring it through premature opposition. The soft overcomes the hard, the slow overcomes the fast, because soft and slow are sustainable while hard and fast burn out. Chapter 11, discussed earlier, uses practical examples. 30 spokes share the wheel's hub. It is the center hole that makes it useful. Shape clay into a vessel. It is the space within that makes it useful. Cut doors and windows for a room. It is the holes which make it useful. Therefore, benefit comes from what is there, usefulness from what is not there. This illustrates the complementarity of something and nothing, being and non-being. These spokes, something, are only useful because of the hub's emptiness, nothing. The clay, something, is only useful because of the interior space, nothing. The walls, something, are only useful because of the openings, nothing. Neither something nor nothing alone is sufficient. Usefulness emerges from their relationship. Chapter 5 uses the image of a bellows. The Tao is like a bellows. It is empty yet infinitely capable. The more you use it, the more it produces. The more you talk of it, the less you understand. Hold on to the center. A bellows is empty inside, yet that emptiness is what makes it functional. Air can flow through it to fan flames. Similarly, the Tao's emptiness is its creative power. But notice the warning. The more you talk about the Tao, the less you understand. Language and concepts are the realm of distinctions and opposites. As soon as you say the Tao is this, you've created an opposite, not this. The Tao transcends these distinctions. So excessive talking about it actually moves you away from understanding. Hold on to the center, the balanced point between opposites, rather than getting lost in conceptual elaboration. Chapter 45 presents a series of apparent contradictions. True perfection seems imperfect, yet it is perfectly itself. True fullness seems empty, yet it is fully present. True straightness seems crooked. True wisdom seems foolish. True art seems artless. The master allows things to happen. She shapes events as they come. She steps out of the way and lets the Tao speak for itself. Each line contrasts how things truly are with how they appear. True perfection seems imperfect because perfection that advertises itself is actually imperfection. True perfection is natural and unforced, which may appear flawed by conventional standards. True fullness seems empty because it's not cluttered or grasping. There's space and openness. True straightness seems crooked because it bends and adapts rather than maintaining rigid linearity. True wisdom seems foolish because it doesn't parade its knowledge. True art seems artless because skill has become so natural it appears effortless. These paradoxes all point to the same insight. The Tao's way transcends and reconciles apparent opposites. What seems imperfect is perfect. What seems empty is full. What seems crooked is straight. What seems foolish is wise. What seems artless is art. The master embodies this by allowing rather than forcing, shaping rather than controlling, stepping out of the way rather than imposing herself. Chapter 77 uses the image of a bow to describe the Tao's balancing action. The Tao is like a bow. The high is lowered, the low is raised, excess is reduced, deficiency is supplied. The Tao reduces excess and supplies deficiency. Not so with people. They take from the poor and give to the rich, which is quite wrong. Only the master can give to the poor because he has more than enough for himself. He can give without thought of gain because he knows that he already possesses everything worth possessing. When you draw a bow, you push down the top and pull up the bottom, creating balance and tension. The Tao similarly acts to balance extremes, lowering what's too high, raising what's too low, reducing excess, supplying deficiency. This is natural balance, like water finding its level. But humans often violate this principle, taking from those who have little and giving to those who have much through regressive taxation, through structures that advantage the already advantaged, through systems that compound inequality. The master can give freely to those in need because he experiences sufficiency, not because he's wealthy in conventional terms, but because he knows he already has everything worth having. From this inner fullness, genuine generosity naturally flows. Understanding the interdependence of opposites has practical implications. It means you can't sustainably maximize one pole while eliminating the other. Pursue only pleasure, and you'll lose capacity for it. Seek only security, and you'll become neurotic about threats. Demand only strength, and you'll become brittle. It means extremes naturally reverse. What goes up must come down. What expands must contract. What is born must die. It means the path often lies in balance between opposites rather than in choosing one side. And it means that what appears negative often contains positive potential, and vice versa. Failure is an opportunity, success carries danger. Weakness can be strength, strength can be weakness. The poetry and paradox of the Tao Te Ching. Before we move to critical engagement with the Tao Te Ching, we should reflect on its unique literary and philosophical style. Unlike Western philosophical texts that typically proceed through logical argument and systematic exposition, the Tao Te Ching operates through poetry, paradox, metaphor, and aphorism. This style isn't accidental or merely aesthetic, it's essential to what Lao Tzu is trying to communicate. The form and content are inseparable. The text's opening statement, "The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao," establishes that language is fundamentally inadequate for capturing what Lao Tzu wants to convey. The Tao transcends concepts, categories, and distinctions. It's not an object that can be defined or a principle that can be stated in propositions. Yet Lao Tzu must use language to point toward it, to evoke it, to guide readers toward direct experience of it. How can language point beyond language? Through poetry and paradox. Poetry works through image, metaphor, rhythm, and evocation rather than through logical argument. When Lao Tzu says the highest good is like water, he's not making a logical claim that can be proven or disproven. He's offering an image that invites contemplation. Think about water, its qualities, its behavior, its effects. Soft yet powerful, yielding yet persistent, life-giving yet humble, seeking the lowest place yet essential to all. Meditate on these qualities and you begin to sense something about the Tao that couldn't be captured in abstract definition. The text is filled with such images drawn from nature and everyday life. Valleys, rivers, mountains, uncarved blocks, clay vessels, bellows, bows, grass, trees, infants, mothers. These aren't random illustrations of separately established philosophical points. They're the very means by which philosophical insight is conveyed. The images carry meanings that can't be fully translated into conceptual language. You must dwell with them, contemplate them, allow them to work on your imagination and understanding. Paradox serves a similar function. When Lao Tzu says the soft overcomes the hard, emptiness is fullness. Doing nothing, nothing is left undone. Knowing you don't know is strength. He's deliberately violating ordinary logic to jolt readers out of conventional thinking patterns. These statements can't be understood through normal rational analysis. They seem contradictory, but that's the point. The Tao doesn't conform to ordinary logic because ordinary logic operates within the framework of distinctions and oppositions, while the Tao transcends these. Paradox invites a different kind of understanding. When you encounter doing nothing, nothing is left undone. You can't just accept it as a straightforward claim or reject it as nonsense. You have to sit with it, puzzle over it, let it work on you. Gradually, through contemplation and perhaps through direct experience of Wu Wei, the paradox resolves, not into a logical proposition but into an insight that can only be expressed paradoxically. You understand it not by analyzing it, but by becoming it, by embodying Wu Wei in your own action. The brevity of the chapters also serves a purpose. Most chapters are just a few lines or a short paragraph. This isn't because Lao Tzu had nothing more to say. It's because extended exposition would undermine the teaching. Each chapter offers a concentrated dose of wisdom meant to be absorbed slowly, contemplated deeply. If Lao Tzu had elaborated at length, explaining every implication and defending every claim, he would have created a conceptual structure that readers could study intellectually without ever experiencing the Tao directly. The brevity forces engagement. You can't just read through it quickly, accumulating information. You have to pause, reflect, return repeatedly. The repetition of themes across chapters also seems deliberate. Lao Tzu doesn't develop his ideas in a linear, progressive fashion. Instead, he circles around the same central insights: the nature of the Tao, Wu Wei, the sage's character, simplicity, humility, approaching them from different angles, using different images, adding slight variations. This repetition with variation creates a kind of spiral deepening. Each time you encounter the theme, you see it slightly differently, understand it a bit more fully. The teaching accumulates not through logical progression, but through this spiral circling. The Tao Te Ching also employs rhetorical questions, direct address, and imperatives. Do you want to improve the world? If you want to accord with the Tao, just do your job, then let go. Stop thinking and end your problems. These aren't neutral philosophical observations, but direct challenges to the reader. They create an I-thou relationship between text and reader, making reading an active engagement rather than passive reception of information. You're addressed, questioned, commanded, forced to consider not just intellectually, but personally how these teachings apply to your life. The ambiguity of the text is also significant. Many passages can be read multiple ways. Whose perspective is being presented? Is Lao Tzu endorsing this view or critiquing it? Is this literal advice or ironic provocation? The text doesn't always make this clear, and different translations often resolve ambiguities differently. This interpretive openness isn't a flaw but a feature. It invites active engagement, prevents closure, keeps the text alive across readings and across interpreters. A text that said everything clearly and definitively would be dead once understood. The Tao Te Ching remains alive because it never says everything clearly. There's always more to discover. Chapter 81 ends the text with a fitting statement about words and truth. True words are not beautiful. Beautiful words are not true. The good are not argumentative. The argumentative are not good. The wise are not learned. The learned are not wise. The sage never tries to store things up. The more he does for others, the more he has. The more he gives to others, the greater his abundance. The Tao of heaven is pointed but does no harm. The Tao of the sage is work without effort. These final paradoxes summarize much of the text's teaching. Truth doesn't conform to conventional aesthetics. It's often plain, blunt, uncomfortable. Beautiful rhetoric often conceals untruth. Good people don't need to argue because their goodness is evident. Argumentative people reveal their lack of goodness through their need to prove it. Wisdom isn't identical with learning. You can accumulate vast knowledge without gaining wisdom, and wisdom may come with little formal education. The sage doesn't store things up, doesn't accumulate knowledge, possessions, achievements, because this would be grasping. Yet through giving and doing for others, the sage experiences abundance. This final paradox captures the Tao's logic. Giving creates having. Emptying creates fullness. Working without effort accomplishes everything. The Tao of heaven points, it's sharp, clear, definite, but does no harm because it points toward truth without forcing. The sage's Tao is a work without effort. Wu Wei again, the fundamental teaching. The poetic and paradoxical nature of the Tao Te Ching means that engaging with it is fundamentally different from engaging with analytical philosophy or systematic theology. You can't simply extract propositional content, evaluate arguments, and determine whether you agree or disagree. The text doesn't work that way. It works more like a koan in Zen Buddhism, a puzzle that can't be solved intellectually but that through sustained contemplation may trigger insight, or like poetry that must be read multiple times, each reading revealing new layers of meaning. Or like a finger pointing at the moon, you must look where it points rather than analyzing the finger. This creates challenges for critical engagement. How do you evaluate a text that deliberately transcends logical evaluation? How do you critique teachings that are offered not as propositions to be proven, but as invitations to experience? We'll address these questions in our critical section, but first we should appreciate the text on its own terms, as a unique fusion of philosophy and poetry, argument and art, teaching and mystery. Critical engagement with the Tao Te Ching. Having explored the Tao Te Ching sympathetically, understanding its teachings and appreciating its literary qualities, We now need to examine it critically. What are its strengths and limitations? What questions does it raise but not answer? How should we evaluate its teachings, both philosophically and practically? And what's its relationship to historical and contemporary contexts? Historical and textual questions. The first set of questions concerns the text's origins and authenticity. As mentioned in our introduction, scholars debate whether Lao Tzu was a historical person and whether the Tao Te Ching was written by a single author or compiled from multiple sources. The traditional attribution to Lao Tzu in the 6th century BCE is probably legendary. Most scholars date the text to the 4th or 3rd century BCE during the Warring States period, and suggest it may have been compiled by multiple authors or editors. Does this matter for understanding the text? In some ways, no. The teachings stand or fall on their own merits regardless of who wrote them or when. In other ways, yes. Understanding the historical context helps us interpret ambiguous passages and understand what problems the text was addressing. The Warring States period was a time of political chaos, constant warfare, and competing philosophical schools. The Tao Te Ching's emphasis on peace, simplicity, and withdrawal from political ambition makes more sense against this backdrop of violence and disorder. The text also exists in multiple versions with variations between them. The two main versions are the Wangbi recension, 3rd century CE, and the earlier Godian and Mawangdui manuscripts discovered in the 20th century. These versions differ in chapter order, wording, and sometimes meaning. This textual fluidity complicates interpretation. Which version is authoritative? How do we handle passages that differ significantly between versions? Modern translations typically work from one of these versions or create composite texts, but this means different translations may present meaningfully different texts. Philosophical strengths. Despite these textual complexities, the Tao Te Ching contains profound philosophical insights that have endured for over 2 millennia. Its greatest strengths include the critique of language and conceptual thinking. The recognition that language inevitably distorts reality by creating distinctions and categories is deeply important. Much human suffering comes from reifying concepts, treating abstract categories as if they were concrete realities, then trying to fit reality into these categories. The Tao Te Ching's reminder that the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao keeps us humble about the limits of conceptual knowledge and open to direct experience. The principle of Wu Wei. The insight that effective action often requires not doing, that forcing outcomes usually backfires, that the best results come from working with rather than against natural processes. This is profoundly practical wisdom. Modern applications in fields from sports psychology to organizational management to psychotherapy have validated Wu Wei's effectiveness. The concept challenges the Western bias toward active control and intervention, offering an alternative paradigm based on receptivity and response. The understanding of complementary opposites, the recognition that opposites are mutually defining and interdependent, prevents simplistic dualism. You can't sustainably maximize one pole while eliminating the other. This applies to everything from personal psychology. You can't have only pleasure without pain, only security without risk, to politics. You can't have only freedom without order, only equality without hierarchy. The wisdom lies in finding dynamic balance rather than pursuing extremes. The emphasis on simplicity and sufficiency. In a world obsessed with accumulation, achievement, and complexity, the Tao Te Ching's counsel to simplify and recognize sufficiency is refreshing and countercultural. Research in psychology confirms that beyond a threshold of material sufficiency, additional wealth doesn't increase well-being and may decrease it. The teaching that he who knows that enough is enough will always have enough addresses a root cause of modern discontent. The model of non-dominating leadership, the vision of leadership as service, of governance as minimal intervention, of power as empowerment rather than control, these remain relevant and challenging. Much bad governance comes from excessive interference, from leaders who need to prove their importance by constant activity. The ideal of doing less while accomplishing more, of leading by following, offers a valuable alternative to authoritarian and bureaucratic models. The ecological sensibility. Though not environmentalism in the modern sense, the Tao Te Ching's emphasis on living in harmony with nature respecting natural patterns, and not dominating or exploiting the natural world, anticipates contemporary ecological concerns. Its warnings about artificial intervention disrupting natural balance are especially relevant in our age of environmental crisis. Philosophical weaknesses and problems. However, the Tao Te Ching also faces serious criticisms and limitations, vagueness and lack of specificity. While poetic ambiguity has virtues, it also creates problems. The Tao is never clearly defined. Wu Wei is never precisely specified. What counts as natural versus artificial action is often unclear. This vagueness allows broad interpretation but also permits almost anyone to claim they're following the Tao. How do we distinguish genuine Taoist wisdom from someone simply rationalizing their preferences as natural? Potential for passivity and quietism. The emphasis on non-action, yielding, and acceptance can be misinterpreted as counseling passivity in the face of injustice. If evil disappears by itself when not opposed, why resist tyranny or oppression? While Lao Tzu likely didn't intend this interpretation, Wu Wei is spontaneous appropriate action, not passive non-resistance. The text can be read as justifying inaction when action is morally required. Some Taoist movements have been politically passive or collaborated with oppressive regimes, though others have been revolutionary. Romanticization of primitivism. The vision of simple village life. Rejection of technology and learning. Contentment with ignorance. This can seem like romanticizing primitive conditions that involved poverty, disease, and suffering. While Lao Tzu is critiquing excessive artificiality, some passages suggest rejecting civilization wholesale. This raises questions about whether the Tao Te Ching offers guidance for complex modern societies or only for imagined simple ones. Gender issues. The text uses feminine imagery positively. The valley, the mother, receptivity, which was unusual for its time. But this imagery may reinforce stereotypes associating femininity with passivity and masculinity with action. The teaching to know the male but keep to the female could be read as valorizing feminine qualities, but it still treats male and female as distinct essences rather than recognizing gender as socially constructed. And despite the feminine imagery, the text seems to assume male readers and leaders. Political implications. The ideal of minimal government can be interpreted as justifying neglect of social welfare and inequality. If the ruler should let people be and trust natural order, what about addressing systematic injustice, poverty, or oppression? While Lao Tzu does criticize inequality and militarism, his positive political vision is thin. How do you create justice without interfering? How do you help the vulnerable without meddling? The text doesn't clearly address these questions. The problem of action. If Wu Wei is effortless action, how do you distinguish it from ordinary action? When you act, how do you know whether you're practicing Wu Wei or forcing? The concept seems to require achieving a state where the distinction between acting and not acting dissolves, but the text provides little guidance about how to reach this state or recognize when you're in it. There's a bootstrapping problem. You need Wu Wei to achieve Wu Wei. Moral guidance. The Tao Te Ching critiques conventional morality as artificial, but it doesn't clearly specify an alternative. If we reject imposed rules and norms, what guides behavior? The text suggests that alignment with the Tao naturally produces good conduct. But how do we know what the Tao requires in specific situations? Different people following what they consider natural may act in contradictory ways. Without clearer moral guidance, the text seems compatible with almost any behavior. The status of the Tao. Is the Tao a metaphysical reality or a useful fiction? Does it exist independently of human thought, or is it a conceptual construct we project onto reality? Lao Tzu seems to suggest the former. The Tao is real, eternal, the source of everything. But if the Tao transcends language and concepts, how can we make claims about its existence or nature? The text seems caught between realism, the Tao really exists, and mysticism, the Tao is beyond existence and non-existence. Without resolving this tension, contemporary relevance? Despite these problems, the Tao Te Ching remains strikingly relevant to contemporary concerns. Burnout and overwork, Modern culture glorifies busyness, productivity, and constant striving. The result is epidemic burnout, stress, and exhaustion. The Tao Te Ching's teaching about effortless action and recognizing sufficiency offers an antidote. Wu Wei isn't laziness but working smarter rather than harder, finding flow rather than forcing results. This resonates with contemporary research on flow states, work-life balance, and sustainable productivity. Environmental crisis. Our environmental problems stem largely from attempting to dominate and exploit nature rather than working with natural processes. The Tao Te Ching's emphasis on harmony with nature, minimal intervention, and respect for natural balance speaks directly to ecological concerns. Modern ecological science confirms that sustainable practices work with rather than against natural systems, exactly what Lao Tzu advocated. Leadership and management. Contemporary leadership theory increasingly recognizes the value of servant leadership, adaptive management, and empowerment over control, all consistent with Taoist principles. Organizations are discovering that micromanagement stifles creativity, while trust and autonomy enhance performance. Leaders who create conditions for success, rather than controlling every detail, often achieve better results. This is Wu Wei leadership in practice. Mental health. The Tao Te Ching's teachings about acceptance, letting go, and not striving are consistent with modern therapeutic approaches like acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, and mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR. These therapies teach that trying to control or eliminate unpleasant thoughts and emotions often intensifies them, while accepting them paradoxically reduces their impact. A Wu Wei approach to mental health. Political polarization. In our age of intense political conflict, the Tao Te Ching's warnings about the limits of force, the importance of yielding, and the danger of seeing opponents as evil are relevant. Political solutions based on domination, crushing the opposition, tend to create backlash and escalation. Approaches based on understanding, dialogue, and finding common ground, more consistent with Taoist principles, may be more sustainable. Technology and complexity. We live in unprecedented technological complexity, with systems so intricate that unintended consequences are inevitable. The Tao Te Ching's warnings about the dangers of excessive complexity and artificial intervention seem prescient. From social media's unexpected effects on mental health to algorithms' unanticipated biases, we're learning that complex interventions often backfire in ways simple, natural approaches might avoid. Consumerism and materialism. Consumer culture creates endless desire for more possessions, more experiences, more stimulation. The Tao Te Ching's teaching about contentment with enough, the dangers of endless accumulation, and the value of simplicity challenges this. Research confirms that experiences matter more than possessions for happiness, that decluttering reduces stress, that simple pleasures can be more satisfying than expensive ones. Conflict resolution. The teaching that the soft overcomes the hard is being applied in conflict resolution, negotiation, and restorative justice. Rather than adversarial approaches that create winners and losers, these methods seek solutions where all parties' needs are acknowledged. Yielding to others' legitimate concerns while asserting your own, holding both sides, is more likely to produce sustainable resolution than rigid insistence on your position. Personal authenticity. In a world of social media performance and constant self-promotion, the Tao Te Ching's counsel to be simply yourself without proving anything is liberating. Because she has let go of herself, she is perfectly fulfilled. This suggests that the exhausting project of constructing and defending an ideal self-image is unnecessary. Authenticity, being who you are without pretense, is both more sustainable and more fulfilling. Interpretations and applications. The Tao Te Ching has been interpreted in various ways across history and cultures. In China, it became the foundational text of religious Taoism, though this involved adding elements, deities, rituals, immortality practices, not present in the original text. Philosophical Taoism, associated with Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi, emphasized natural spontaneity and skepticism towards social conventions. Religious Taoism, which developed later, incorporated the philosophical texts but added elaborate cosmologies, practices for achieving immortality, and complex rituals. In modern Western interpretation, The Tao Te Ching has been read through various lenses. Some see it as primarily mystical or spiritual, a guide to enlightenment or union with ultimate reality. Others see it as primarily practical, offering wisdom about leadership, strategy, and effectiveness. Still others see it as primarily political, a critique of oppressive government and a vision of libertarian freedom. Some read it as deeply religious, others as entirely secular. All these interpretations find support in the text's ambiguity and depth. The text has influenced diverse modern movements and thinkers. Deep ecology draws on Taoist ideas about harmony with nature. Anarchist political theory finds support in critiques of government and authority. Business leadership books apply Wu Wei to management. Martial arts traditions incorporate Taoist principles of yielding and using opponents' force. Contemporary philosophy of technology engages with Taoist warnings about artificiality. Psychologists draw on Taoist acceptance and letting go. Each application highlights certain aspects while perhaps neglecting others. One fascinating application is in the philosophy of technology. The Tao Te Ching's skepticism toward artificial complexity and its emphasis on working with natural processes can inform how we design and deploy technology. Rather than technological systems that try to control everything through complex intervention, we might create systems that work with human psychology and social patterns. Rather than replacing human judgment with algorithms, we might design tools that augment and support human capabilities. This is technology aligned with Wu Wei, empowering rather than controlling, supporting rather than replacing. Another contemporary application is in sustainable agriculture and permaculture. Industrial agriculture tries to dominate nature through chemicals, monocultures, and heavy machinery. Sustainable approaches work with natural processes, crop rotation, polycultures, building soil health, achieving productivity through cooperation with nature rather than domination. This is Taoist agriculture. Wu Wei farming that accomplishes much by forcing little. In psychology and personal development, the Tao Te Ching offers an alternative to the goal-oriented, achievement-focused approaches that dominate self-help culture. Rather than setting ambitious goals and striving intensely to achieve them, the Taoist approach suggests clarifying what you genuinely need versus what you've been taught to want, then allowing appropriate action to flow naturally. Rather than forcing yourself to change through willpower, allow change to emerge through insight and acceptance. The paradox is that trying hard to change often prevents change, while accepting yourself as you are allows natural transformation. Concluding reflections. As we reach the end of our journey through the Tao Te Ching, what should we take away from this ancient text? Not perhaps a systematic philosophy or a definitive guide to life. The text doesn't offer these, and trying to extract them would violate its spirit. What the Tao Te Ching offers is a different way of seeing, a different orientation toward reality, a different approach to action and existence. The core insight is that there's a way, a natural order, a fundamental pattern that underlies all existence. We can align ourselves with this way or work against it. When we align with it, action becomes effortless and effective. When we work against it, we create struggle and suffering for ourselves and others. This alignment doesn't come from learning more, striving harder, or controlling better. It comes from letting go, simplifying, yielding, becoming receptive to what is rather than imposing what we think should be. This teaching challenges almost everything modern culture tells us about success, achievement, and the good life. We're taught that more effort produces better results, that control ensures security, that accumulation brings satisfaction, that complexity is sophisticated, that winning requires defeating opponents. The Tao Te Ching questions all of this. Sometimes less effort produces better results. Control creates insecurity by making us anxious about losing control. Accumulation produces dissatisfaction by creating endless desire. Complexity creates problems. Winning through domination creates enemies and instability. The alternative the Tao Te Ching offers, Wu Wei, simplicity, sufficiency, yielding, humility, seems weak or passive from conventional perspectives. But Lao Tzu insists it's actually stronger and more effective. Water is soft yet carves through stone. The valley is low yet becomes the destination of all streams. The sage yields yet endures. This is paradoxical only from a conventional viewpoint that equates strength with hardness. From the Taoist viewpoint, true strength comes from flexibility, true fullness from emptiness, true power from not striving. Whether we accept this teaching depends partly on empirical questions that can be investigated. Does Wu Wei actually produce better results? Are simple lifestyles more satisfying than complex ones? Does yielding in conflict really lead to better outcomes than forcing? Contemporary research in psychology, ecology, organizational behavior, and other fields increasingly supports Taoist insights, though always with qualifications and context dependencies. But accepting the teaching also depends on deeper questions about values and worldview. Are we willing to question our culture's assumptions about progress, achievement, and control? Can we trust that letting go leads somewhere good rather than to chaos? Are we capable of the patience and faith that Taoist practice requires? These aren't questions that can be answered purely intellectually. They require experimentation, experience, and personal verification. The Tao Te Ching doesn't ask for belief in its doctrines. It invites testing through practice. Try Wu Wei in some area of your life. Try simplifying. Try yielding instead of forcing. See what happens. The proof isn't in philosophical argument, but in lived experience. If these practices produce the peace, effectiveness, and fulfillment that Lao Tzu promises, that's verification enough. If they don't, perhaps you're not practicing them correctly, or perhaps they don't work for you in your circumstances. This empirical, experiential orientation is one of the Tao Te Ching's strengths. It's not dogmatic theology demanding faith in unprovable claims. It's practical wisdom inviting you to test for yourself. The text points towards something, the Tao, but insists you must see it directly, not take Lao Tzu's word for it. The teachings are fingers pointing at the moon. You must look at the moon, not worship the fingers. At the same time, the text's very vagueness and ambiguity mean that almost any behavior can be rationalized as following the Tao. Someone dominating others can claim they're exercising natural authority. Someone neglecting responsibilities can claim they're practicing Wu Wei. Someone accumulating wealth can claim they're not attached to it. The text provides few objective criteria for distinguishing genuine alignment with the Tao from self-deception. This is a real problem, not easily solved. Perhaps the best guidance comes from the qualities Lao Tzu attributes to the sage: simplicity, patience, compassion, humility, flexibility, contentment. If your practice of Taoist principles produces these qualities in your character and life, you're probably on the right track. If it produces complexity, impatience, selfishness, arrogance, rigidity, dissatisfaction, whatever rationalizations you offer, you're probably off track. The proof is in the fruit. Does this make you more like the sage or less? The Tao Te Ching also offers something increasingly rare in our polarized world: a both and rather than either-or approach. Rather than forcing choices between individual and community, freedom and order, action and acceptance, it suggests holding apparent opposites in tension. The sage is pointed but doesn't pierce, straightforward but supple, radiant but easy on the eyes. This both and wisdom is difficult. Holding tension between opposites is harder than choosing one side, but it may be what our complex world requires. Finally, the Tao Te Ching reminds us of mystery. In our age of information and expertise, when we expect clear answers and definitive solutions, Lao Tzu insists that ultimate reality transcends understanding. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. There's something irreducible, something that can't be captured in concepts or controlled through technique. This is humbling and liberating. Humbling because it means we can never fully understand or master reality. Liberating because it means we can stop trying. We can let go of the exhausting project of total comprehension and control. We can be at peace with mystery. Whether the Tao Te Ching is primarily a political handbook, a spiritual guide, a philosophical text, or a poetic masterpiece, it remains what it has been for 2.5 millennia, a profound meditation on how to live well. Its teachings about simplicity, naturalness, yielding, and effortless action challenge us to reconsider our assumptions and try a different way. In a world of increasing complexity, anxiety, and conflict, its ancient wisdom seems more relevant than ever. The path it points toward, the pathless path of the Tao, remains open to anyone willing to walk it.